Uh, I know you won't mind. If you do, too bad. You can go back and start eating early. But I'm going to just talk to you guys for a little bit today. Graduation is a cool thing from high school. You're going to the unknown. You know that, don't you? It's the unknown. You have no clue where you're going from here. And you witnessed that today when Allison kind of asked, what your plans are. You think you know what you're going to do. Just by show of hands, anybody in here who's doing exactly today what you plan to do when you graduate from high school? If you're doing exactly what you plan to do when you graduate from high school, look around the room. Look at how many hands. Jake, because that was last year. Phil, because he wanted to be a loser roamer from high school. He was a hippie. He's a hippie still. You got two hands in this room went up of people who said they're doing exactly what they thought they were going to do in high school. And that's why I say it's the unknown. I mean, it's really, you got plans, you got ideas, and you got to act on them. But don't be afraid of changing plans, and don't be afraid of changing gears, and don't be afraid to do anything else that opportunity provides for you to do. When you step off into this unknown, it's always nice if you get a little bit of advice from people who have stepped into the unknown ahead of you. Problem with that is there's no place to get advice. You ask your parents, but why would you? Nobody asks their parents for anything except money. Isn't that right? I mean, when's the last time any of you said, hey, Mom or Dad, can you give me some advice about something here? You didn't probably do that anytime soon. Most likely you've done what I did and everybody else in this room did, including your parents who wouldn't admit it to you. Most likely when you go to your parents, you just say, hey, I'm $5 short. At $5 in my day, y'all, it's $50. Hey, I'm $50 short. I need to help pay my phone bill or whatever. In my day, it was $5 would almost fill your car up with gas. That's the truth. I think, if I'm not mistaken, when I was in high school, gas was 23 cents a gallon. I think that's right. It was pretty close. It's 20-something cents a gallon. And we used to chuckle because my car that I had when I came back from Vietnam and bought a Pontiac, it got like 12 miles to the gallon, which is horrendous. If you're having to pay $3 a gallon in gas, it is. But when you're paying 23 cents a gallon for gas, 12 miles to the gallon doesn't seem too bad. And I don't know if today y'all might not even measure how many miles you get per gallon because it doesn't matter as long as you can get more money from your parents. They didn't tell me to say that. I'm just saying it because I know they're kind of thinking it. You're expensive. You are terribly expensive. And if moms and dads ever gripe about how much you cost, it's just because we don't know what else to gripe about. We just want to vent. Because the truth is, there's not one of them, your parents or me, anybody else in this room, there's not one of them that would actually not go through the path they've gone through with you. We know it's expensive when we have children. We don't care. We just step into it because we want children. And then we fall in love with our kids so much that money is not something we equate to their value and their worth. So you've been fussed at over money, but you've never been measured or valued in terms of money. My dad was good at cryptic advice. I think that's a good word. I'm not sure, but my dad didn't really give advice. He didn't know how to give advice. It's amazing how much has changed in just a few generations since your great grandparents, for example. Y'all are graduating and you got a little free time. You're kind of thinking about might go to college, going to the military, going to get a job, going to make some money. But you think about it, just back to your grandfather or your great grandfather. Most likely your great grandfather. Your great grandfather probably didn't even have a graduation ceremony. Might not have even gone to a school where most of the kids did graduate. My dad, which would be my kid's grandfather, I suppose, my dad went to a one-room school in in 1917. My dad went to a one-room school here in Texas. All the kids in the farming community went to that same school. And he survived it for about 3 years. But then, in just that short, just that recent in American history, in 1920, my dad was in the 3rd grade, and he was needed on the farm. He was strong enough at that age that he could help bale some hay. He could help run a plow. He literally had the straps over his shoulder, stand behind the mule at about 9 years old, and literally plow furrows behind a mule. And his dad needed him on the farm. And so instead of going back after the 3rd grade, sometime in the 3rd grade, he just quit to work on the farm. It wasn't like he thought, I'm going to make a lot of money on the farm. It wasn't that he didn't think about what's going to happen to me when I'm 18 or 20. They just did what they had to do. And in just 3 generations, the time has changed so dramatically. And that's why sometimes the advice that you wish you could get, I wish somebody could tell me what to do next, it's never going to come. Because the generation before you didn't have the same challenges that you faced. Your moms and dads didn't go to school the same way you do. And the temptations weren't the same, the pressures weren't the same, the problems were different. And the advice that I could give would be pointless. I'm kind of like my dad. I don't really give much advice. I give sound bites. And so I'm going to pass on a sound bite from my dad. When I got out of high school, pretty much like you four, I thought I knew more than I did. And I was kind of stupid. But I don't really mean that part about you four. I just didn't know what I was going to do. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to become an engineer. So I went to junior college right out of high school to be an engineer to start. The only problem with my life plan was I hate math. And so I was struggling in trigonometry, and I was struggling in physics, but I wanted to be an engineer. So you kind of get my drift. I didn't come in with stellar grades. I came in with passable grades. And so that's what I thought I would do. And in May, I didn't pre-enroll for the next year, and I got drafted. In those days, the Army, the military needed people badly, so every kid had to register for the draft, and then my number came up, and because I didn't pre-register, I got drafted. So I don't mind telling y'all, I was kind of scared when I got drafted. I didn't know. Seemed like everybody was going to Vietnam that got drafted, and I didn't want to go to Vietnam. And I had great faith in God. I had a great desire to be an engineer. I was already working for an engineering firm that had, a job promised to me when I get my degree. And now I'm drafted, and I've got to go. My dad had never been in the military, so I couldn't ask him what's going to happen, what advice could I get. Ricky's dad and granddad, don't tell me they put him to work. Did they put him to work? Did Ricky have to go upstairs? Shame on y'all. Ricky's dad and granddad were in the Marines, so at least he knew what he was getting into. Dade, you can talk to a couple of these Navy guys around here, but they're so old. They don't know how much has changed, since they were in. And I can't tell you anything about the Navy because I never was in it, other than we made fun of boys in the Navy, in the Army. But I do know what you're in for. You're in for the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. You have no clue what barracks life will be like or what it's like to live on a boat if you're going to have to for a while. You could ask a couple of these old Navy men around here, but the boats they were on were they're like antiques now. So they couldn't tell you. They might not even have beds on the boats they were in. They might have hung them up in cocoons and slept on the wall. It's just, you can't get current information from some of these old sailors. But I was curious. I wanted to know, and there was nobody to ask. And then when the actual day came, the way the Army did it was I had to be downtown Dallas before dawn. I had to be there like at 5 o'clock in the morning. So the sun wasn't even up yet. My dad, you don't take anything with you. I just had to go. He was going to drop me off on the curb in front of the induction station in downtown Dallas. You don't take a suitcase or overnight kit or anything, because the clothes on your back, you're going to take them off in that room after a while, and then you're going to put them in a box, and they're going to mail them back, and they're going to give you the clothes you can wear. Olive drab, everything olive drab boxer shorts, and olive drab socks and fatigues, and that's what you're going to wear. And so I rode all the way downtown with my dad driving, my mom crying at the door, and I wondered what my dad would say. I literally envisioned when we pull up to the curb, Dad's going to give me, 5 minutes worth of, now, son, you can call us, you can do this, you can do that, if you need anything. And I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. Here is my father's posture. He pulled up to the curb. He's driving. I'm sitting over there. He pulls up to the curb. He's been silent for the last 5 or 6 miles, 10 miles. I mean, he never said a word. We just drove in silence in the last half of that drive. We pulled up to the curb in front of the induction station, and my father stuck his hand over without looking. And he said, "Don't let them take your faith. Don't lose your faith. Whatever you do, don't lose your faith. Don't let them take it." And I shook his hand and looked back, and he's still just like this. And I said, "Okay." And I got out of the car, and he drove off, and I went into the induction station. And my father's only words, "Don't let them take your faith. Don't lose your faith." I know now that my father wouldn't look at me, because if he looked at me, he'd have started crying. I know that now. I didn't know that as a boy. You'll never know how many times your mom or your dad has cried behind your back. Now, your moms sometimes cry to your face. They're not good at hiding that stuff. But dads, they don't cry to your face. They cry after you've gone. And you'll never know how many times, because they don't tell you. And I would learn, as when I came back from Vietnam, I saw my father emotional for one of the few times he ever was. But I realized in years to come why he was like he was, why he acted like he did. But I will tell you this, that phrase, "Don't lose your faith," I thought, well, that's nothing to tell a boy. And then when I actually got through basic and through AIT and got orders for Vietnam, in Vietnam I had so much time to think about everything, pondering my past and hoping I had a future, that I weighed those words of my father carefully. And I came to understand that even though he had no clue what the military life was like, he would have said that to me if I was going off to college. Because his only concern for me in life was, don't lose your faith. My father never told me how much money I needed to make, or that ought to be one of my goals. He never said, you need to marry the right girl. He left me pretty much to experience life, except for that one little piece of advice. The only advice he gave me, and I'm fixing to change my world in the military, and he said, don't lose your faith. It was somewhere in Vietnam that I think I really grasped the beauty and the challenge that he laid down in that phrase. Because faith, it turns out, is pretty much everything. And I would tell all four of you, the best advice I can give you today is the same my father gave me. Don't lose your faith. I don't care how much money you make. Me and most of the world won't measure you too much by how much money you make. It doesn't prove anything about a person. It doesn't put character in your heart. It's just something you pay bills with. And so you make enough money to pay your bills, and then if you make more money than your bills are, you just go make more bills. I don't know why we do that. So if you start off making, $2,000 a month, and then you'll spend $2,000 a month, and then somebody says, "Hey, I like you. I'm gonna give you $7,000 a month." Yay! And the first thing you do is go buy a bigger house and bigger cars, and make more debt, and then it costs you $7,000 a month to live. And if somebody stupid that came along and said, "I'm gonna give you $20,000 a month," then you'll go make $20,000 worth of debt, and it'll cost you that money. That's just what we all do. I don't know why we're kind of like that, but I don't care. I would tell you that it doesn't make any difference what kind of job you get and how much money you make. If you lose your faith, you've lost everything anyway. If you keep your faith, then it doesn't really matter if you become fabulously wealthy or you have nothing. I was enjoying watching the other day Will Ferrell. Is he still alive? Does anybody know who Will Ferrell is? He, well, he's not like a current comedian, is he? I was watching Will Ferrell. He gave a commencement speech to college graduates, and I was intrigued by something Will Ferrell said to them. He was telling them, he gave them a little auto bio about how he became a comic, and pretty much he admitted he didn't even know what he was going to do. He floundered through college. He went to some little improv groups. He was trying, and then he just, his parents didn't necessarily approve of, but they didn't tell him to quit. Just, he stepped out, tried to do some improv. He wasn't a good stand-up comic, but he wouldn't quit trying. And he said that he made a few connections, got a couple of little gigs, and it's just fate. Lorne Michaels, I think, is the name of the guy that owns Saturday Night Live. Anyway, he and a couple of people just looking for talent stopped into this little improv place where Will Ferrell was, and they kind of liked his little routine. And over the next 6 weeks, he had interviews with them, and they asked questions, and he filled out forms, and he got a gig, his first gig. He got it on Saturday Night Live. And the rest, as they might say, is history. When he got through telling all that, he looked at that audience and he said, but if you were, I guess I've had some success, but if you were to ask me if I'm successful, I would point to my wife and say, that's my success. 16 years I've been married to that woman that I love. And that's how I would tell you I'm successful. 3 kids I've had with her, and I'm trying to be a good dad to them. That's how I would tell you I'm successful. So he downplayed all of his fame on television and movies and the millions and millions he's made, and he just downplayed all of it and said, if you ask me if I'm successful, I would point to her and tell you I've been married to her for 16 years. That's success. I've got 3 kids. That's success. And those are the things that are going to define y'all. In time, you're going to get married. In time, you're going to be dads. That's a terrifying thought to your parents. You're going to be a mom. Oh, my God. Can you imagine? Can y'all imagine Dade as a dad? Come on, seriously. Austin, a father? Cole. He'd be beating his kids with felt drum sticks, trying to play music with them. Erica, she'll be throwing them out a second floor window for a fire rescue dummy trip. But you're going to be. And one of the hardest things for the 4 of you to believe is you'll be as old as I am one day. But you will. You'll be a grandmother, grandfather, maybe a great-grandfather, great-grandmother. And did you know when you get through with your life, you look back over it, you yourself will not look back anymore and measure yourself by the jobs you had and the money you made. You'll measure it by, hey, I was successfully married. Hey, I had kids that turned out halfway decent. Have fun family times together. I've had a good life. And somewhere in the middle of all that, if you can say, I had faith, and that faith becomes the common thread that holds everything else in life together. So when my dad said, don't lose your faith and don't let them take that, it didn't mean a lot sitting on that curb, but it meant a lot when I was in Vietnam. And I was terrified a few times when mortar rounds were hitting our base camp and we were being assaulted at the wire around our little camp. And I was on a hot spot for 9 months on Cu Chi, which was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail between Saigon and Cambodia. And I can tell you that if I hadn't found God before those 9 months, I would have found him in those 9 months. Because there were some nights that I just thought, if it's going to be God, if we make it. But then when the sun would come up the next day, and the enemy would disappear, and the streets we would unclutter everything and get back to life as we knew it. Then there would come a moment where I realized, hey, it's okay. Maybe the next time this happens, I won't be quite so afraid. And in the process of all that, I discovered that it was all right to go to God when I was afraid. The important thing was to just believe that he was there. So let me just share 3 kinds of faith with you real quick. This is not a biblical exercise. I don't know that you could find a scripture that proves what I'm fixing to tell you. In fact, you'll find people who know the Bible so much better than you and me, and they'll tell you that they'll argue about the gift of faith, and they'll probably give you faith in 5 dimensions and all of that sort. And that's okay. I don't care. But I'm going to tell you 3 kinds of faith. That's the best advice I can drop with you, just like my dad did me. Don't ever lose your faith. And the first faith is just that, acknowledging faith. Believe there's a God. You don't have to understand him. You don't have to figure out how did he make the world? Did he do it by a long process of spinning wheels, or did he just speak it? I don't know. There's no scripture that ever tells me and you that is how much we know that approves us with God. There's no scripture that says, according to your knowledge, you're going to be saved. The scripture is only about believing. By grace are you saved through faith because you chose to believe. Belief is a choice you make. It's not an accident. It's not something your parents can force on you. It's not something preachers can wrap up and give to you. It's a choice. I choose to believe there's a God. I may not understand how the world came to be. I may not understand creation versus evolution. I may not understand the geological formation of 7 continents and the plates of the earth. I may not understand the flood. I may not understand, but I choose to believe there's a grand designer behind it all. I love the way Steve Jobs, in a commencement speech years ago, before he passed away, founder of Apple and then the founder of Pixar, and superbly, fabulously wealthy billionaire kind of person. But I love the way he told his own autobiography, and he said that he was adopted. His mother didn't feel like she could raise him, but she put stipulation in. She wanted somebody who adopted him to have college degrees and be able to put a college fund aside for him. So she laid all that out for his life to be what she wanted to be, but she couldn't give to him. And then the first couple that adopted him backed out. And then an undereducated couple wanted him, and she found out they didn't have college education, and she threw a monkey wrench in the plans and insisted that they have a college fund. So they set up a college fund for this boy from the time they adopted him. And he grew up with adopted parents and went off to college after high school, and college bored him. But they had this commitment, this obligation to put him in college. And so he became, against his long-since mother that he never knew anymore, plan for his life, he became a college dropout. Puttered around in his garage and fooled around with this new thing called computers, and you know the story, the rest of it's history. But he would tell the story of his life until you realize he didn't have a silver spoon handed to him. This founder, one of the wealthiest men in the world, founder of Apple and Pixar, was never given this gift from his dad. He didn't inherit computer genius from his mom and dad. He just found something he liked in his garage, playing, him and a friend trying to create something, playing games and stuff. And they came up with this idea, and he tells this whole story until you just realize pretty much Apple was an accident. He didn't really invent anything. He just improved something that was already out there, but still, he figured it out. He did it. It was cool. And then when he wraps his story up, he alludes to this God that he doesn't really talk about. He says, when I look forward, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what my next step, I don't know what next week will be, and you don't either. Next month, you're leaving in September for the military. You'll be leaving sometime to go to Lamar. You're going to live on campus. You're going to go to Lamar and live on campus. You're going to burn buildings down. You're going to work and plan on getting married. You better start working 2 jobs. Just going to tell you. And that's just to start with. You'll need 3 before it's over with. But 2's a good start. But you really don't know where you're going to be a month from now. And that's what Steve Jobs said. He said, when I look ahead, I don't really know what the future holds. But when I look back, and he just got through telling us the backward story with so many crazy choices and mistakes, and he said, but when I look back, all the dots where I was and had to be, all the dots connect. And I'm compelled to believe that there had to be a grand design for my life, because I would have never connected that dot to this dot and this dot to that one and that one. And I couldn't have done it projecting the future. But looking backwards, I realized every step was necessary. Every failure was necessary. Every setback set me on this path and changed my mind to go this way. And you look backwards and you realize, man, somebody who knows me and loves me had to be in charge of that. And one day you'll be old enough, like him and me and most people in this room, you'll look backwards at your life and say, oh my goodness, I would have never chosen that path. I thought I was going to do this. I thought I was going to live here. I thought I was going to marry him or her. I thought I was going to do this. And all of it somehow perfectly will fit together to make you the person you're going to be in the future, as it already has. And so it's just the idea that there's a grand designer. And Steve Jobs didn't go into a study on evolution and creation and how could there be a God. He just left the knowledge dangling out there. I believe somebody designed my life. Never lost my faith. I would tell you that there are verses on the screen that I put up just about this acknowledgement of God. Hebrews 11 simply says, he that comes to God must believe that he exists. Doesn't say you have to have the answers about him. He who comes to God has to understand how and answer all the questions of the critics and know the Bible front to back. No. If you want to come into the presence of God, you just have to believe that he exists. And that's a good starting point. And in Acts, the 8th chapter on the right side of the screen is just a story about Philip, a young preacher, converted a man as they were riding in his chariot. And they came to a place where there was water, and the man said, why can't we stop right here and you baptize me out here in this puddle? And he said, well, I can't. So they stopped the chariot and held the horses, and they stepped down in the water, and he says, if you believe that Jesus is the Christ, and he said, I believe with all my heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He just got his first lesson about Jesus from the Old Testament book of Isaiah in the chariot as they were riding. And he says to Philip, I believe with all my heart that Jesus is the Christ. He's the Son of God that you said he was. You could have asked that man 10,000 questions and he wouldn't have known the answer to even one of them because he didn't know. He was reading a book that was foreign to him, Isaiah, and another young man interpreted the book for him, a Hebrew man. So he didn't say, I know, I understand who God is. I've got him figured out. I know what kind of substance he's made of. I know where he lives. I know where the heavens are. I know if there's a heaven or a hell. I know how creation worked. He didn't know anything. He just made the most declarative statement that anybody can make that can change their life, and that is, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And that acknowledging faith is all he asks of us. By grace are you saved through faith, not through knowledge, not through being a genius, not through knowing the answer to every Bible question, not through knowing where you came from, not through debating whether you came from an amoeba or God spoke to you. You just, faith. I just choose to believe. Second kind of faith then is, for lack of a better term, I just said, rescue me kind of faith. We get a glimpse of this in the Lord's Prayer. Remember when the disciples said, Lord, teach me to pray, and we see you pray. They must have felt something when he prayed. They must have seen something. It must have got their attention. And so they asked Christ, how should we pray? And he gave them this simple prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You've heard me mention it before because I think it's a morning prayer. Give us this day our daily bread is not a prayer you can pray at 11 o'clock at night. I think Jesus is trying to tell us, hey, you don't have to start off with a long prayer in the morning. Just start off remembering me. My Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. It takes about a minute to do that. I'd challenge you to do that for the rest of your life. I do it with mine. I've challenged this church for 25 years. Start your day with 2 minutes. Just acknowledge God. But in that prayer is this little phrase, and deliver me from evil. There's a certain kind of faith that understands it's not just me choosing to believe in God, but God can really keep me out of a mess. He can really keep me out of trouble. It brings me some kind of patience, and it centers me a little bit sometimes driving. And don't y'all love Houston traffic? I mean, I'm guessing that y'all probably drive a little bit like my wife. I mean, I'm calm and sedate, and I don't care how long it takes me to get where I'm going. But my wife, She needs to be teleported. And if there are too many cars for her to be teleported and she has to drive, they are in trouble. She drives fast, and I've had to ride with her a couple of times. I make great effort not to ride with her. But my wife is one of those kind of people that I pray for the Lord's Prayer. Deliver her from evil today, God. I've discovered that if I have a flat tire, instead of being angry that I'm going to be late, I feel so confident that God's in control of my life. I'm just kind of like, probably kept me from something. Probably kept me out of a wreck that I'd been in. Probably kept me from being there too early and meeting the wrong person. I don't care. I'm not super spiritual, thinking everything has a spiritual explanation. I've just learned to say, God, I don't really worry too much. You're in control. And that's that rescue faith. Because then if something really does happen, I feel confident that I can just ask God to deliver me from it. That's his promise. That's his language. Just deliver me. I put Luke 17 and 19 up, and it's just one of many phrases that use the same phrase. There's one about blindness. There's one about an issue of blood. There's one about a man who was crippled. And the phrase is the same. Thy faith has made thee whole. So faith is acknowledgement of God. And that's the beginning point of faith, and don't ever lose that. And then there's a second kind of faith that's like, man, faith can actually change something. It can make me whole. It can fix something. It can deliver me from evil. And you don't. The crazy thing is, and what I wish I could pass on to you four is that you don't have to step into that second kind of faith like there's a door. I'm going to live in this realm for a while, and then I'm going to mature and grow up into that. That's not it. It's just if you just keep that first faith, that second faith is always available to you. And I got to see it. I'd have probably never left home. Like some of y'all leaving soon. Me personally, when I went in junior college, I was content to live home because my dad paid the rent and mom had food on the table. And to be quite honest with you, I'd have probably stayed there for another 20 years if I hadn't got drafted. I'd have probably married and moved in with them if I'd have got married to a woman that would have moved in with them. But the Army changed that. I had no choice but to move out. And I wasn't really ready to move out emotionally and spiritually. I didn't feel like I was my own man. But in Vietnam, I couldn't even pick the phone up and call them. I couldn't call home and say, hey, help me figure out something here. Tell me what to do. There was no phone. No cell phone, no computers. All those things they weren't even imagined yet. So we just lived for 13 months isolated and out of touch. We'll be home. A letter would take 7 to 10 days to come home. And then their response 7 to 10 days. So we couldn't hear from home within 14 to 20 days. That's just the way it was. So you learn not to depend on home. You depend on something. So the first few times we were hit with incoming, I found myself laying in bed and just quietly praying, God, if you're there, can you protect us? Do you watch over us? And then I discovered that he did. And then I saw some wonderful things happen to me and other kids there. And then there were some scary things. I decided after I got bold and confident and had been there for about 10 months, 11 months, I found out one of my buddies was at another camp on a hilltop 10 miles away. At night, I could see the red light on top of their transmission tower 10 miles from our base camp. And I found out one of my buddies was over in that base. And I decided one day to go AWOL, to just sneak out, get on a truck that was going out the gate, and ride 10 miles down the road, see my buddy, catch another truck, ride back. Nobody would ever know. So I did. I went and hung around the gate at our camp. You going to camp, whatever? And they said, yeah. Can I bum a ride? Yeah. Nobody asked questions. I jumped in the truck. They took me to that base camp. Got in, found my buddy. Just as I sat down to visit with my buddy, honest, we had not had 3 minutes. We sat down in his hooch, and just as we sat down, a grenade exploded behind us, and the shrapnel went all through the wall above our heads and up into the roof. Only reason it didn't hit us is because between this hooch and that one was a mound of dirt for incoming. And so we thought it was incoming at first, and then we realized it was a pothead, a marijuana nut, who was trying to kill the commanding officer next door because he had put out a stern law, no more pot smoking in my company. And so that kid decided he would throw a grenade right there, the dirt that rolled against that hooch over there, and blew a hole in the wall and blew the chair into splinters, and the CO had gotten up and walked across the hut to the other side, and so he wasn't killed. And then the mound of dirt threw the shrapnel up above our heads, blew this hole in the wall. Problem with that is anytime anything like that happens, they shut the camp down until they find out who did it. I'm on a camp AWOL. They're going to shut the camp down. I'm AWOL from my camp 10 miles away, and I am going to be unaccounted for. That's going to be Article 15, maybe a little time in jail. I got to get to the gate and catch a ride and get back. But I can't run. If I'm running and everybody's scurrying to see what this explosion was, I look like the guilty dog. So I took long strides, and I tried to look nonchalant. And I got to the gate, and I caught the first truck going out. And the first truck going out turned off the road 4 miles down, left me with about a 5-mile walk to my base camp in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Vietnam. And I begged them, can't y'all just take me on up? No. So they put me out, and I got to walk. And I had barely been, I'm talking about a little trail road, not a road. And I'd barely been walking, and I hear little motorbikes coming. Everybody in Vietnam rides little motorbikes. And I hear them coming. And sure enough, 8 boys or so, I've forgotten 5 motorbikes, some of them riding 2 to a bike, but it was 8 or 9 boys pulled off the side of the road and surrounded me and wanted to sell me drugs for money. They had marijuana and drugs, and they wanted money from the GI on the road, and I wasn't armed. And so I don't mind telling you, I had some military training flashing through my mind. I'm trying to think, yeah, I can probably take these 8 guys on. There's another part of me saying, God, deliver me from evil. Please help me. And so I'll leave that story hanging because it's better hanging than being told. But I will tell you that I discovered that day on the side of the road that there is that element of faith. God has this ability to make you bigger than you are. He has ability to, you remember the phrase that we use is, deliver me from temptation. It starts off saying, lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from evil, and some say from the evil one. So in other words, it's kind of like saying, hey, if God does that for you, he makes you bigger than the temptation. He makes you bigger than the evil one who will come against you. And he does. It's fascinating that faith has the ability to slip out of just you acknowledging God and God rescuing you. And it's all the same faith. But it has such a different dimension. And then the third thing that I put on the screen about faith is that there's an element of faith that just does awesome stuff. But it's not something you can't say, when I graduate from the first level of faith, I'm going to get in the second level of faith. And when I graduate from the second level, I'm going to get in the third level of faith. It doesn't work that way. It's all faith. And yet it has so many other opportunities. The verse on the screen simply says, from 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul is talking about, hey, I'm going to show you a better way, and the better way is love. And then he says, if I spoke in tongues of men and of angels, but didn't have love, it would profit me nothing. And then he cracks the door on faith with this phrase, and even if I had the kind of faith so that I could remove mountains. And he didn't say that God could. If I had the kind of faith that God would move any mountain for me, he said, if I had the kind of faith, I could move mountains. But I didn't do it out of love. He's not saying that doesn't happen. He's saying that could happen. But if I did that and I didn't have love, there would be no point to it. I would only do that in love. You mean you believe you could move mountains? Acts 5:12, by the hands of the apostles were many signs and wonders wrought among the people. I have watched over the years, I have watched God do phenomenal things Only a couple for me. But people in my churches for 45 years have just blown me away with how simple faith, just simple faith, turns into what you need it to be if you don't lose your faith. My dad's advice was don't lose your faith. And I get it now. You've probably heard me tell the story about being in Vietnam and my girlfriend dropped me. Girlfriends are so fickle. And she wrote me, "Dear John, I'm in Vietnam. For pity's sake, can't you lie to me for a few more months? Just string me along and act like you like me until I get home." But no, she dropped me. And then I wrote a letter or two trying to find out what's going on back home, but it takes 7 to 10 days for the letters to come back. The first few letters that started trickling in depressed me even more. My sister turned on me, I thought. It sounded like she was turning on me and blaming me for making Mom and Dad miserable with something I wrote to them. Was it their fault? I'm just trying to find answers. My world was caving in on me. And one day I just couldn't do my job anymore. I just depressed. I just quit. And I went back to the hooch, and you probably heard me tell, I didn't even know how to pray that day. I was so low, and my life was over back home. My dad had been and Mom had been kicked out of the church that I was in. They'd been kicked out, not because they did anything wrong, because I was engaged to the preacher's daughter. And their presence was an embarrassment because she wanted to date one of my friends, and it was bad. And we were sad. And I was gone. My commanding officer saw me leaving my duty, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, I just gotta go see somebody. And I went to my hooch, little plywood divider between my bed and the guy over there, just one that we'd rigged up. And I just laid on my cot and laid forward, didn't pray, just kneeling position like I was in prayer, but I just laid there thinking. And I don't know how long, probably 20 minutes, and then I'm like, I don't know, I got to pray, I guess. I didn't lose my faith, lost my hope, lost my pride, lost my love, didn't lose my faith. And in that one little moment, that little tiny piece of faith was incubating. And at least I thought, oh, I can just lift a hand. I didn't even pray. I just raised back on my knees, still on my knees by my cot. And I just held a hand up like this, and I just thought, if the words come, okay. If they don't, okay. And this was my posture. And if you can imagine, in that moment, one of my idiot knucklehead friends must have been peeking over the plywood divider, and he stepped up on a little bed or a stool on the other side because he had to step up to reach over and get my hand. And here I am in agony, in prayer, on my knee, at least in a prayer posture. And he reaches over the wall and grabs a hold of my hand. And I'm embarrassed. And he squeezes. So I squeeze back. And I'm thinking, dear God, what an idiot. Okay, why would he get my hand? Why doesn't he understand? But everybody had a gun in Vietnam, you understand? So you're careful how you respond to people. And so I count to 10. I'm just thinking, what can I say to this fool? So finally, I got my composure, and I decided what I would do is just finally I'd shake my head, look at me and say, "You are such an idiot." And he would laugh, and I'd laugh, and he'd leave me alone. So I was ready, and I got my composure. And I looked up, and there was nobody there. I'm holding his hand. It has squeezed, and I'm gripping it, and there's nobody there. And then I break out in goosebumps. And I hear in my head this voice say, "Just hold of this hand. Just don't, no matter what else happens, just hold of this hand, and I'll take care of everything in your life." And it was just a little faith. And it became such rescuing faith. And then supernatural, like, what? And I'm telling you, that one, it sounds silly, but that one experience changed me forever. I can never, to this day, ever forget that. Never have felt it since. I've reached my hand up a few times. I confess to you, I've reached it up a few times hoping that he would reach down. He never has. But once was enough, because once was transforming to me. And then, man, I've seen people in my church. a truck driver told me a wild tale about fixing to have an affair and cheat on his wife, and he pulled his big truck up on Interstate 20 going, fixing to head out of Dallas, and all of a sudden a blinding light came into the cab of his truck. He thought he was fixing to hit something, blinded. And Christ came into the truck, he said to me, and talked to him, told him all of his life and what he had done and where he had been, how he had been involved. And he told this guy his history to show him, I've been there, and I was there, and I was there, and now you're going to cheat on your wife, and you're going to ruin your family, and you're going to destroy. And he said, finally, the result was I just started bawling and saying, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I will go back and make this right. I won't let it happen. I'll do it right. And then the light went away, and he's sitting there driving his truck on an interstate, and the green sign for the exit coming up, and he realized that he had driven 45 miles on the interstate from the last time the blinding light came in the cab. And I know people say, he's a loony bird. But in that moment, he knows he was not a loony bird. He started coming to my church with his family, and I don't mind telling you, I thought he was loony when he told me the story at a McDonald's after he visited church. And I thought, well, I've never seen that happen before. And he started coming to church, and not long after he started coming to church and hearing me preach about faith when I had some doubts, and getting to know the people in church who had great compassion and prayer for each other. His high school boy went to school with a headache one day, and people started giving, one boy started giving the kid aspirin, only it wasn't aspirin. He was giving him drugs he'd taken from his mother's medicine cabinet because he thought it was cool to have drugs with him, and it turns out he was giving him Valium, which is like a sleeping pill. And by the time the kid got into auto shop in school that afternoon, they don't know how many he'd taken, maybe 12. Maybe 14 Vicodin. He'd taken enough to kill him, put him down, put his heart down. And he reached over, somebody wisecracked about orange juice, and he reached over and grabbed a vial of battery acid that had an orange color to it and threw it down his throat thinking it was orange juice. He was drunk on Valium. Don't know how many. And instantly, of course, the acid started burning his esophagus and his throat. He started hemorrhaging, bleeding, puking blood. And they called an ambulance and got the boy to Garland Hospital as quickly as they could. I got a phone call from his daddy. Remember the daddy who had the blinding light and told him not to do that, and he made his life different? The daddy calls me, my boy's dying. They told me he's unconscious. He's never going to wake up again. I went to Garland Hospital. The boy was unconscious. They had tubes running in his mouth. They couldn't put them down in his throat. They said if they pump his stomach, the esophagus will destroy itself, and they can't fix him. The esophagus has been eaten by the acid. There's nothing they can do except wait, basically, till he dies. They need to get the drugs out. They can't. They can't run a tube down in there to give him air or whatever, because basically everything in here is burned up, and he's hemorrhaging, and he's going to die. They gave him 12 hours. 12 hours, Daddy never left his side. The daddy who saw the blinding light. Not a great. When I say truck driver, there are truck drivers here, so I want to be kind about it. This was one of the crudest truck drivers you'd ever meet. This is one of them boys that never has clean fingernails. Always looks like he just got through working on the transmission of his car. Never graduated from high school. That's the kind of man that had a blinding light. Christ came in his truck and kept him from committing disaster in his family. And this is the kind of man kneeling by his boy's bed in the hospital with dirty hands up on that bed praying out loud for his son. 12 hours came and went. Daddy was thinking that was magical. He said he made it. No, they gave him 12 more hours. They just kept saying 12. He was between the 24th and 36th hour. And the doctors just amazed he was still alive and prolonging, doing everything they could just to keep him from hurting himself. They didn't even want him to wake up at this point, because the doctor said he'd probably never speak right again. If he survives, there'll be some reparative surgery here. And the father calls me, would you come back to the hospital? I go back to the hospital. The dad says to me, I believe God can heal my boy. Well, I do too. This is not some guy who graduated from seminary. This is a dad. And Billy said to me, Pastor, would you kneel down on that side of my boy's bed and reach over and join arms with me? And so he knelt down on one side, and I knelt down on the other, and the nurses never leaving the room. And Billy reached across, and I reached across, and he grabbed my arms, and I let a father just weep and cry. He wept and he cried, and he prayed for God to heal his son, and we're just across the bed like this. And I cried, and I prayed quieter than he did. He didn't care who heard him. That's his boy. God, please. And so we got through praying. I got up and hugged everybody, and I left the room and cried in my car for a while. A few hours later, I got a phone call. That boy was in that room. Daddy was over there asleep in a chair. A nurse heard somebody say, I'm hungry. And she turned around thinking it was Dad, and it was that boy, and she looked at him, and he was looking at her and said, I'm hungry. And she let out a scream and ran out in the hallway, woke up the dad, yelling for the doctor, who she knew was down the hallway. The doctor comes running thinking he's dead, walks in. The doctor says, what? And the boy says, I'm hungry. And the doctor pushed his tongue down with a tongue depressor, looked in his mouth, looked at the monitors on his heart, looked at everything up there, took a couple of tubes off of his nose, out of his face, turned around with tears in his eyes and said to one of the nurses, my God, the boy said he's hungry. Somebody go get him something to eat. And one of the nurses said, well, what do you want? And he said, I'd like to have a hamburger. Whataburger was right across the street from the hospital. And they sent somebody over to Whataburger and got a hamburger and a Coke, brought it back, and the boy ate the hamburger and drank the Coke. The boy, they said, would never talk again without surgery if he lived. There's no way anybody will ever explain it. The doctors themselves said, the doctor said in that room that evening, I have no explanation for this. He wouldn't say, this is a miracle. He said, I have no explanation. As far as I'm concerned, the boy can be released. Take him home. Billy wasn't a giant with great faith he learned somewhere in seminary. Billy just had little faith. And I'll finish with that verse. There's a verse that says, and Jesus is the one who said it, if you just have faith as a grain of a mustard seed, that's how small a mustard seed is. If you just have that much, he didn't say there are 5 dimensions of faith or there's 3 kinds of faith. He just said if you have faith, that much right there, you, with that much faith, somewhere in your life, you'll be able to say to that mountain, be thou removed, and it will be removed. And all it takes is that. And Billy was living proof for me. And I can tell you how awesome it is to see once in a while that people who simply don't lose their little faith at some point in life discover how magnificent faith can be for them. My dad's advice to me was, son, don't lose your faith. He didn't have a clue what I was going to face in the next year or two. Neither do I for you. But I would tell all 4 of you simply today, don't ever lose your faith. Don't try to make it bigger and wild and do crazy stuff. Just keep your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And if the day comes you need to be rescued, remember, if you hadn't lost your faith, that kind of faith will rescue you. And if you ever need something super awesome and fantastic to happen in your life, it is possible with just that much faith. You can say to the mountain, don't ever lose your faith. Stand, please. God bless all of you today. Thank you for just sitting in on our meeting up here. Appreciate you doing that. Join with me in prayer, and then we'll let you go. And those of you that can stay and eat lunch, they got lunch for everybody, so you're welcome to stay. Father, I just thank you today for these 4 graduates. Thank you for their life so far. Thank you for their faith and their character so far. Thank you for the kind of people they have turned out to be to this moment. All of us in this church are proud of them and so proud for their future and wonder what's going to happen and what kind of people they'll continue to be and what families they'll develop and what kind of children they'll have in time to come. God, the future's in your hands. We look backwards and we know you've got us all under your control. We look forward and we don't know where we'll be next month. In the middle of all of it, there's that little thread of faith. May we never lose it. May we keep it until it takes us home to heaven. In Jesus' name. And somebody say, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. All right, give the Lord a hand of praise. They might want y'all back there early, I don't know. So why don't y'all slip in and just see if they want y'all back there early. They might want y'all to get back.